Hello, history students. We've been working the last couple of days really getting in depth about the Qin dynasty by reading chapter 22 of our History Alive textbook called The First Emperor of China. So we're going to do a quick review just to make sure that you have the right answers and that you're on the right track. So let's start with the first section. The first section is 22.2, Creating an Empire. So here's question number 1. It says, do you think Qin Shi Huangdi's strategy of conquest helped or hurt China? Explain your answer. Now remember, this does say, do you think? So it is kind of an opinion question, but it has to make sense based on what you read in the section. So here's a possible answer. Qin Shi Huangdi's strategies of conquest helped China because now everyone is unified and knows what to expect. You could have also said that it hurt China, but as long as you explain your answer and it makes sense from what you read in the section, you'd be having a correct answer. All right, question 2 says, how did Qin Shi Huangdi end feudalism and why did he do this? Here's a possible answer. Qin Shi Huangdi ended feudalism because he felt threatened by others and he wanted a strong central government. He also believed in legalism. If you remember from chapter 21, that meant he believed in very strict laws and making sure you had a strong government. Okay, so he believed in legalism. So what he did to end feudalism is he created 36 districts and he put 3 people in charge of each district. One for the army, one to be in charge of the laws, and one to report back to the emperor so he would know what was going on in his 36 districts. Okay, the last part of this section was you deciding, did the Emperor of Qin's efforts to unite China make him an effective leader? So you have to decide somewhere along there whether he was very ineffective on the angry face side or very effective as a ruler on the happy face side. So I'll let you choose that one on your own. All right, let's take a look at the next section. 22.3, standardizing culture. Standardizing means that everyone all over the Qin dynasty, all over ancient China at this time, did it all the same way. So a standard makes sure that everyone is doing it the same way. So question number 1 says, why did the Emperor of Qin standardize money, weights, and measures? So here's a quote from the textbook that you could find the answer from. It says, to make it easier to trade, the emperor standardized money, weights, and measures. This helped unify China. So really, he wanted to make sure everybody everywhere in China used the same kind of money, weight, and measures. That way it would be easier to trade. Everyone would have the same kind of language and the same kind of money for trade. Question 2 says, how did the Emperor of Qin change the written language? So again, here's a quote from the text. It says, the emperor simplified the writing system. He got rid of many of the written characters that were in use across China. Later, a dictionary listed 9,000 approved characters. So you can imagine if ancient China had different dialects and different languages all over the place in these 36 districts, it would be kind of confusing to have a conversation. So he simplified it and he made sure there was a dictionary so that everyone would have the same language. It would make communication easier and trade easier along with the money, weights, and measures. So now you know your job. You need to decide, did the Emperor of Qin's efforts to standardize Chinese culture make him an effective ruler or an ineffective ruler? So you got to be the judge of that one. All right, 22.4, protecting the northern border. Okay, so the question number 1 says, how did the emperor protect China's northern border? Here's a quote from the text. It said, to protect his empire from invaders, the Emperor of Qin ordered a long wall to be built along China's northern border. The Great Wall of China. You're going to learn more about that in a little while, but we can kind of tell that he built this big wall to keep everybody in China safe. He wanted to make sure that invaders from the north weren't coming in and killing people in the villages. But that's not without difficulty. So question 2 says, what difficulties did workers who constructed the Great Wall face? So here's another quote. It says, the workers who built the wall labored under difficult conditions. The wall crossed high mountains, deserts, swampland, and quicksand. The weather was bitterly cold in the winter and blazing hot in the summer. According to later accounts, tens of thousands of men died while working on the project. Their bodies were buried in the wall. Wow, that sounds like it could be pretty difficult. So it sounds like a wall would be a really great idea to keep everybody protected in China, but I don't know if it's worth the difficulties that they faced and the tens of thousands of people who died in building it. So this is what you got to do. You have to decide. Did the Emperor of Qin's efforts to protect China's northern border make him an effective ruler? Mark your answer with an X on the spectrum. Make sure you do that because you're going to be judging him in just a little while. All right, let's keep going. Okay, here's the next one. Section 22.5, ending opposition. Opposition just basically means that people were going against the Emperor of Qin because they disagree with him. Okay, so let's take a look at question 1. Question 1 says, why was there conflict or fighting between Confucian scholars and the emperor? Remember, we know what Confucianism was. We learned about it in last chapter, in chapter 21. Think about Confucianism and thinking about legalism while I read this quote. The changes introduced by the Emperor of Qin to unify and protect China aroused a great deal of opposition. They were especially unpopular with Confucian scholars. The Confucians believed in proper behavior and good example, not harsh laws. But remember, the Emperor of Qin believed in harsh laws and harsh punishments and making sure everyone was following what the central government told them to do, which is the opposite of what Confucian scholars believed. And so they kind of had an argument. So question 2 says, what did the emperor do to prevent people from learning about Confucianism? Here you go. The emperor was determined to end opposition to his rule. It is said that he executed 460 Confucian scholars for plotting against him. Later it says that all Confucian books should be brought to the capital city and burned. Scholars who disobeyed the order would be marked with a tattoo on their faces and sent to do forced labor. Anyone who discussed ancient teachings to criticize the government would be executed. Seems pretty harsh, but he was trying to end the opposition. He wanted everyone to follow in line. Remember, he believed in harsh rules and strict punishments. He followed legalism. Okay? All right. Based on what we just learned, judge for yourself. Did the Emperor of Qin's efforts to end opposition make him an effective ruler? Make sure you mark your answer. Very ineffective, or very effective, or somewhere in between. All right, here's the last section, 22.6. The Emperor's death and the end of the Qin dynasty. All right, so eventually, Qin Shi Huangdi did die. So he was buried in a tomb. So first question asks, list 3 things that were buried in the Emperor of Qin's tomb. More than 700,000 workers helped build the tomb. Some of them were buried with the emperor to prevent grave robbers. Okay, so they buried some of the workers. What? The treasures in the Emperor of Qin's tomb were tools, precious jewels, and rare objects. Most amazing of all, there was an entire army made of a kind of clay called terracotta. So there were some pretty amazing things buried in that tomb. But what happened to the Qin dynasty after the death of Qin Shi Huangdi? Well, here's another quote from the book. It says, in fact, the Qin dynasty fell apart shortly after his death. Rebellions broke out, civil war followed. The revolts were ended, and the Han dynasty was established. So you can see that during the reign of the Emperor of Qin, he was very strict and very harsh, and when he died, everything kind of fell apart because there was still the opposition. So based on what we just learned about him dying and the end of the Qin dynasty, do you believe the Emperor of Qin was an effective ruler and his effort to become immortal? Go ahead and make your decision now. All right, I hope you enjoyed our lessons or our discussion about the Emperor of Qin, Qin Shi Huangdi. We're going to learn a little bit more in just a few minutes about the terracotta warriors buried in his tomb and also about the Great Wall of China. So enjoy those other videos and congratulations on learning about the Qin dynasty.